We are going to get started. First, let me welcome Becky Kaapuni and Kristina Willis. Yay! We're so glad that you guys are here. We're going to talk through all things kind of EA to Chief of Staff, stay, grow, pivot. I've had these calls before in Nova Chats, but now I have support and folks who are going to give a whole different perspective, which will be really fun. But first, let me share a little bit about Nova Chief of Staff. We are the premier destination for Chief of Staff development and education. We launched our Chief of Staff certification course about 20 months ago, and we're getting very, very close to 1,000 students across 30 countries. You can email us anytime at hello@novachiefofstaff.com. You can check out our syllabus online to see, hey, would I benefit from this course? That's where I usually recommend people start. And our course price is $1,850. About 70% of our students get that funded from their companies. We do offer certain nonprofit or veteran discounts and a few other things like that. So you can always email us to inquire there. But we have a special promotion for this call because we hit 1,000 folks registered. And we're going to give $250 off of our Chief of Staff certification course through 30 days. And that code is NovaChat250. So all caps, NovaChat250. We'll put all of this information in the chat for you. But that's enough about us. I'm going to pass it over to my friend Jared to chat through a little bit about Offsite, and then we're going to kick off this Nova Chat.
Awesome. I think you guys are in for an amazing webinar. I've gotten to work with everyone here on the panel, and they are really knowledgeable about their craft and great at sharing that online. So definitely follow Kristina and Becky and Maggie on LinkedIn. And I'm going to be listening into the webinar myself. I'm Jared. I'm the founder and CEO of Offsite, offsite.com. We plan offsites. It's in the name. We primarily work with chiefs of staff and executive assistants, as well as heads of people at remote first, hybrid, distributed companies. We've worked with the likes of Remote, Buffer, Reforge, HubSpot, Webflow, Linear, so on and so forth. We've planned offsites in 25 countries, so almost as many places as Maggie has students. We're getting there. And we can help you in one of two ways. So you can go to offsite.com, make a free account. There's no credit card required, and you can search to your heart's content, just like you would search Airbnb. You can book your room block, meeting space, venue needs, and save up to 50%. We also are expanding our marketplace to include vendors. So you can get your photographers, videographers, travel agents, swag, basically anything you would need for an offsite through our marketplace. The other thing we do is we do end-to-end offsite planning as a service. We charge you a flat fee per person per offsite, and we do everything with you and for you. And so that's all the venue and vendor selection, all the negotiating, the contracting, all your agenda creation, your budgeting. We can be on the ground with you and make sure the event goes off without a hitch. And we are just your partners in thinking about not only the logistics of planning an offsite, but also the people side of it, how to maximize the ROI of that offsite, all things employee engagement, retention, alignment. So yeah, check us out. I'll include a link in the chat for you. If you use this link, it just lets us know that you came through Nova. You can make a free account anytime, and we'd love to work with you if you're planning an offsite. Other than that, hope you enjoy the webinar and take lots of notes because Becky, Kristina, and Maggie are awesome.
Thanks, Jared. Cool. Well, we appreciate you, Jared. Thanks for being here. And we will get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is read Becky and Kristina's bios, and then I'm going to dive in a little deeper with each of them about their background. So Becky Kaapuni is a fierce advocate for executive assistants and a leader of the EA revolution. Becky has spent over 2 decades masterfully navigating the C-suite at powerhouse companies, including Salesforce, Twitter, and Goldman Sachs. Her mission is to unlock the vast, untapped potential within every EA, empowering them to rise up, claim their worth, and become the CEOs of their own lives. Through the EA Social Club and her book, The Unstoppable EA, she's transforming how EAs see themselves. With her dynamic community, mentoring, and advocacy, Becky ignites executive assistants to reshape not just their own futures, but the entire profession. Welcome, Becky.
It's so great to be here with you all.
Yay. All right. Kristina is a versatile leadership partner who's worked across various roles and industries and now serves as head of customer success at 𝐲𝐿, a software company revolutionizing the art of time management and scheduling for assistants. Prior to joining 𝐲𝐿, Kristina spent the last 4 years at a company by the name of We Are Rosie, where she successfully transitioned from EA to chief of staff. With experience supporting founders and C-suite executives, Kristina is an advocate and mentor of the admin profession with an overarching message that there's no such thing as being just an EA. She's also the 2022 award recipient of the Ad Week 50, honoring media, marketing, and tech's indispensable behind-the-scenes stars. Welcome, Kristina.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. And the chat is just full of energy. So hi, everyone.
Love it. Okay, well, if you're like me and you get a little bit, tiny bit distracted by the chat, you can always click to stop showing the chat messages, but we love to have it on there because it does create some fun energy and excitement on these calls. So I won't be looking at the chat. Reminder to put any questions in the Q&A box of this webinar down below, and we'll save like 10, 20 minutes at the end for questions. So feel free to use that function. Okay, Becky, I want to dive in a little bit more. Amazing bio, of course. Tell me about your background as an EA. How long have you been one? How did you find yourself in the role? And maybe like, what's your favorite part of being an EA? And I should caveat that Becky's like a rock star EA who's also doing many, many chief of staff functions while also obviously doing core EA work. So feel free to share a bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I have been an EA for about 25 years. I kind of fell into it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and I found myself in this position. What I realized quickly was that it was a career path within itself. It was not presented that way to me. I did not think about it that way initially, but I really started honing my skills, developing them, leaning in, and really looking at this as a path to become successful. And so I was at Goldman Sachs, Twitter pre-Elon, and then now I'm at Salesforce, of course, sprinkled in with many startups and other opportunities in between that have helped shape where I have figured out that I want to be. And so that's pretty much the background in a nutshell.
Okay, cool. And as we think about like the topic for this webinar, which is okay, we've got a big group of EAs on this call. Are we staying in the EA role and continuing to figure out how to add new and different value? Are we considering transitioning into a new role, potentially chief of staff or something else? And I guess are we pivoting, and that would be to something else. So as you think about those options and your career, have you intentionally been deciding I'm going to stay in this EA role and continue to build it, or are you in a place where you're kind of considering, I'm becoming more elevated and I'm thinking about maybe growing into the next role, or maybe that's already what I'm doing, but I don't have the title yet. Like, how do you think about those transitions?
Yeah, I have always wanted to be an EA. I was never looking to be a chief of staff. I was never looking to do more than that. I would say that being in the tech world, being in, investment banking, I mean, everybody just assumed that the EA and the chief of staff role are combined. And so it's been very much a part of my world to do beyond just EA work. But I do it. I mean, of course I do it. I'm a passionate person, and people pleasing is my number one thing. And so I get stuck saying yes to everything and working ridiculous hours and putting myself out there for my executives. Um, I am very comfortable in the EA role, and I'm specifically passionate about it because it focuses on the heart. I very much like to care for the people that I'm supporting. I want to be the person that they lean on, that they call, that they confide in, that, they feel that they can't live without on an emotional, personal, empathetic level. And so that is really what drives my career, I would say.
Yeah, that's great. And so you really fall into this category of like stay. I am an EA. I love to be an EA, but I know you, Becky, and you actually have enrolled in Nova's course and all the things. Like you also want to continue adding value and taking on more, and you can't say no, but you probably thrive and love that. So we've got a true like stay, love the EA role, want to continue adding value in your EA role in new and different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it is so important to use all the resources to up-level yourself. It doesn't mean that you need to go into that role, but every single bit of knowledge that you obtain and that you gather, it helps you. It makes you a more rounded person. And plus, it gives you more opportunities. There are ways that I show up differently because I've had the experience of what chiefs of staff do. And that is part of becoming a business partner to your executive so that you can anticipate more, you can be there for them, and you can show up for them just beyond the capacity that is expected of you. And nowadays, they expect more than just EA work solely. So you need to be prepared for that as well.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Kristina, let's dive in with you. Tell me a bit about how you found yourself in the EA role, what you were doing beforehand. And then I think we should also dive into the transition that you made from EA to chief of staff. We'll start there before your new role.
Okay. Okay. I have been bobbleheading this whole time to everything Becky said. I'm just there like, yes, yes, yes. Okay. So as far as how I landed in the EA role, I started out in recruitment. So I was certain I was going to be a human resources professional it's what I wanted to do. But I like to say the recruiter got recruited. So one of the executives I was working very closely with building out her org, she came to me one day and was like, come and be my EA. And the conversation started from there. I respected her very much. And in my mind, I just couldn't see how. And I said, but if you're going to ask me, I'm going to try. And I did. And there I really saw a lot of the similarities between what I was doing in my recruitment role, whether it was like supporting that executive very closely to help build out their team, all the communication and the coordination and calendaring. So I got to see why she probably said what she said. And then I fell head first into being an EA. I was obsessed about it. I loved everything about it. To Becky's point about like just caring for the executive, like that resonated a lot. So I never looked back after becoming an executive assistant. And then as far as the transition to chief of staff, you mentioned it earlier. So at 𝐸𝐸, where I spent the last 4 years, I joined as the founder's EA. And it's a startup, right? So 2-year-old company at the time, scrappy. You're just touching everything. You're seeing everything. And I want to make sure I make it clear. Like I had a very forward-thinking executive, someone who had experience with having chief of staff support, and someone who was very much like partnering with me as far as like my growth goes. So the exposure that I had at 𝐸𝐸 and touching a little bit of everything, sitting at the seat with leadership, building relationships across the company. By the time the conversation around the chief of staff came to be, there was a lot of what I was already doing that skewed chief of staff. And similarly, I said yes. So yeah.
And so who started that conversation around the transition of EA to chief of staff?
I feel like the conversation started with my COO and I, who was the first chief of staff at the company. So the conversation started with her. And I wanted to understand a little bit more of like, what did she do during that time in the role? I had kind of taken on some of her responsibilities when she transitioned to COO. So there was like that clean break. So the conversation with her was the starting point. And then once my executive came in, she was just on board. Yeah.
Okay. And you, I'm, kind of thinking back about stay, grow, or pivot. You knew that you wanted to move on from the EA role, or were you not so sure? Like you loved being an EA, or you knew that you wanted to go into something else? Like where were you at in terms of your headspace prior to the transition?
I definitely loved being an EA. I enjoyed it. I think at that point in time, at the company that I was at, where the business was and headed, it also just felt like the next step that still allowed me to touch on the things that I loved, which was like relationship building and communication and things like that. So I loved the EA role, but I was totally up for the growth that was kind of like being presented to me. And it felt clear in a way that it aligned. I was like, okay, I could totally see it. I would be up for the challenge. So yeah.
Okay. I love it. All right. Well, hopefully everybody has a little bit of a picture in terms of Becky's background, Kristina's background, and where they're at in terms of the transition between EA and chief of staff, or the love of the EA role and just sticking in the EA role, which is also great. I hear it all the time from folks. I love being an EA. And we love that. So, All right. I'm going to get into a few of the more nitty-gritty logistical components of like, how do we describe chief of staff? How do we describe EA? What are the differences between the roles? And then lean on Becky and Kristina to help give their perspective and real life kind of opinions on how they see these roles coming to life in their own backgrounds. So, my simple chief of staff definition is that a chief of staff is a business leader's right hand and strategic thought partner focused on executing, organizing, and prioritizing the leader's most important business initiatives that have nowhere else to fall, and driving transparency and alignment across the leadership team. A chief of staff exists to maximize the leader's time and exponentially increase their impact. As the seniority level of chief of staffs grow, you're leading even larger, like cross-functional company-wide projects, and you're often acting as proxy and advisor to your leader. The chief of staff role varies greatly. So for reasons around seniority or tasks at hand, types of company, size of company, the leader's growth potential and opportunities and strengths, those are all going to impact the day-to-day differences of the chief of staff role. But the core purpose of the role, I believe, is the same everywhere, which is, as I mentioned, leader's right hand, maximizing their time, strategic execution focused, high-level support, high-level executive strategic support focused, and executive team alignment. Titles can also vary greatly. We'll pop in the link to our titles blog. It's like our most viewed blog by far on our website. But there's a lot of different titles that folks operate under when it comes to chief of staff. So take a look at that document because it's also helpful to kind of understand what roles could be chief of staff even under a different title. Okay, a couple more things, and then I want to talk to Becky and Kristina about this. I believe that the core purpose, the core difference between EA and chief of staff really comes down to this. But first, let me describe EA. And I'd love to hear Becky and Kristina's thoughts here too. A senior executive assistant is a highly skilled problem solver, a strategic doer, and the logistical mastermind behind the executive's calendar, travel, expenses, inbox, logistics, while acting as the go-to support lead for tactical items across the whole executive leadership team. So big role, lots of breadth, just like the chief of staff role. But here's a key difference. The chief of staff almost never, like the chief of staff title, a true chief of staff role, almost never has the core responsibilities of an EA, being calendar, inbox, travel, expense, and logistics. But often a great EA, just like a strong performer in any role, is going to step in and reach and grab and lead bigger projects or take on additional scope. So while there can be some crossover, understanding that chiefs of staff just generally don't hold those core functions of EA work is really important. I want to pause and get some feedback. So Becky, how do you describe the EA role? We'll start there.
Yeah, I mean, it would be the same.
Okay.
I would say that, EAs also do take on a lot of PA work. Sorry, everybody. That is just the way that it is, depending
And
upon
what do you mean by PA work?
personal assistant work, booking appointments, making sure that kids are getting signed up for the right things. I mean, just things that we don't necessarily sign up for. It definitely gets put into that category because we are taking care of the executive person, right? And not as much of the business. I would say chiefs of staff automatically come in at a level where they're expected not to calendar manage and do all of those extra tasks. But as an EA, if there's not a chief of staff or understanding of what a chief of staff does, then very much so a lot of that gets married into the EA role. I would say this is where the COO and the EA separate. And so then usually the COO will take over some of that higher level chief of staff work that the EA doesn't do. So it can get very complicated when it's not properly defined within a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kristina, from your perspective, especially having done both the EA and the chief of staff role, like what would you add or how have you seen the difference between the roles play out in your experience?
Yeah. I think something that became very apparent to me was the differentiation between, to Becky's point, within the EA role, there's a lot of personal assistant work that just comes with it because you are truly supporting the whole human of the executive. You're supporting them as a human being. And that's where the impact of the EA comes in because you depending on your strategic thinking, you're able to really be it carve out that executive's time, help them manage that time. Where are they spending it? How are they spending it? So it's very human to human. The chief of staff role in my mind, or what I came to learn, was your priorities are the executive's priorities, whereas the EA, your priority is the executive. So it's like a tongue twister.
Say that again. That was so good.
So like the EA's focus and priority is the executive they support. The chief of staff prioritizes the executive's priorities and runs it downfield, gets it done as far as they can. And then if they hit a wall, you kind of loop your executive in, but you are very much driving your executive's goals. Whereas as an EA, you're showing up for that whole human and caring for that executive. Still both impactful, but very different.
Absolutely. So one of the ways that I talk about the chief of staff role is I describe who I believe makes a great chief of staff. And I'm going to list off these characteristics. And then I want to hear from both of you on kind of the crossover and maybe like the differences between this list and like a strong EA, or maybe an EA who wouldn't make as good of a chief of staff. Like what would those characteristics look like? So who would make a great chief of staff? Fast, driven, curious, growth-minded, strong executive presence, achievement focused, high emotional intelligence, loves breadth versus depth. I like to call that an expert generalist. Nobody can step in and be an amazing, like give amazing executive support. So I don't think it's just like a generalist. Anybody can do it. Expert generalist. Great at a lot of things. Problem solver, solution oriented, bias for action, learns quickly, asks great questions, collaborative, influential leader, wants more responsibility, loves supporting senior leadership, and is okay to be behind the scenes. Chiefs of staff and EAs are often behind the scenes. I like to share this list because I get a lot of questions around like what education level is needed, or do you need an MBA or consulting background to be a chief of staff, and those types of kind of credential confusion around the chief of staff role. And my answer is always, yes, there's going to be roles that require MBA, require consulting experience, require XYZ type of experience. But that is not what's most important in my mind. I finished my MBA. It did not teach me anything about how to be a chief of staff. But when I find somebody and they match this list of characteristics, especially like just the highlights of like, driven, achievement focused, wants more responsibility, fast, great at a lot of things, I'm like, you will make a great chief of staff. You've been solving problems, finding solutions your entire career, whatever role you've been in, regardless of your education background. So that's how I describe chief of staff. I'd love to spend a moment thinking about how does this list like compare to the EA role? And, I know the EA role is that, Enneagram number 2, taking care of people, right? And there's a lot of elements of that in the chief of staff role too. But I'm going to pause there. Let's go to Kristina first. What are your thoughts on character traits, crossover, EA, chief of staff?
The first, I feel like the first 8 words that you listed off, riddled off, definitely skew EA in my mind. Being driven, a problem solver. I think being like reactive and proactive. I don't think you mentioned those, but like that proactive mindset of, okay, next time when this happens, how can I minimize all the 1,000,001 steps that had to take place this time? Like, to me, that's all very much an overlap between the EA and the chief of staff. I would also say, if I even think of one word that comes to mind, it's that emotional intelligence, EQ. That is certainly parallel, or like there's an overlap there that both the COS and EA have. So a lot of the characteristic traits you listed are I feel like I possessed them as an executive assistant before I became a chief of staff.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. And Becky, what about like, EAs that wouldn't make great chiefs of staff? There's probably a lot of people on this call who are like, I don't know, would I? I'm not sure.
I think that a lot of EAs would make great chiefs of staff. I think that it literally comes down to, do you want to support the leader or do you want to support the business? I will tell you that every single person I've supported, I've been supporting them. I have not really been supporting the company. It has all been about what my executive wants, what my leader expects. It's been more of a one-on-one relationship with them. than me being a part of a company and being able to be a part of that culture. My whole life revolves around them. I would say that everything that you listed off is hands down what an EA can do. And I think that we discredit and disservice EAs when we tell them that there's a better option, which is being chief of staff. I don't see that at all. In fact,
Yeah.
the people that I work with currently, any one of them could be a chief of staff. I mean, they run with it and they are incredible and they go above and beyond. It's just that they don't have that built out into a possibility. Like, we are not allowed to be chiefs of staff, so that is not an option. And I see
Right.
that across the board. You know, for me, I just really personally want to support the human. So that is the big difference. But the EAs I know, they are so smart. They are so intelligent. Like, this is in their blood. So I think really
Yeah.
the lack of opportunity is what
It's
happens
more of
most.
the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I would say if you like, it's kind of comes down to like what's obvious. If you're really happy in your role and you're not looking to continue to get promoted and like all the next things, and you aren't necessarily trying to lead major strategic projects across the company, as Becky was sort of indicating, like just stay in the EA role if you love being an EA. We've got in our course, like I meet with students every single week, and at least half of our students, we're at almost 1,000 students, at least half of them are senior executive assistants. And of that group, half of those absolutely love their role. They love their role. They don't want a promotion. They're just looking to figure out new and better ways to do their job, to think about adding value differently or taking on different projects, and continuing to elevate in their current role. I think part of the conversation too is that chief of staff is one of many options that an EA should consider. It is not it's not that an EA should leave the EA role. It's not that an EA could only move into chief of staff. It's more so opening up the conversation to say, let's recreate and reinvent some career paths and give some confidence that like you absolutely can move into another role if you're looking to. And ideally there's resources to help you do it, which historically I know there has not been. Anything that either of you wants to add kind of to that part of the conversation? I'll start with you, Becky.
Yeah, I do want to add that, you know, if you're thinking about up leveling, listen, to me, a lot of my leveling is based on my pay. And in my experience, I've made more than a lot of chiefs of staffs that I know. So, you know, I think also getting out of that mindset that there needs to be somewhere else to go. EA is a place to be, and you don't have to be more than that. You are more because of the role that you already have.
Yeah. And finding your voice, dependent on figuring out what you want is most important. Yeah. Kristina, anything from you?
Ditto to Becky. I just love the way she said that. I'm a proponent of EAs becoming chiefs of staff if it is crystal clear that's what they want. And I am a proponent of saying, and if you love being an EA, love it, because it is exemplary work. It is admirable. Most people couldn't live a day in your shoes anyway. So yeah.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Well, something that Becky mentioned, I want to pause on. So just to help kind of paint the picture a little bit as we get back to the brass tacks of the chief of staff role. I love how Becky and Kristina have described the EA role as that human support. You are supporting that executive, that human. What's interesting is the chief of staff also supports the human. That chief of staff role and the EA role are two of like only a couple roles really that live and exist to support the leader. Whereas, and so if I were, I'll kind of paint a picture with a Venn diagram in a minute. But a chief operating officer exists on behalf of the company. They're solving operations problems for the company. They're not necessarily dedicated support for the leader. All of this will flex and change depending on where you are and depending on if all three roles are hired for in the environment you're in. But if we had a Venn diagram with two circles and they overlap, right? EA would be, let's say, on the left under human support, EA right in the middle. On the right, other side of the Venn diagram, company support, chief operating officer in the middle there. In the middle, the crossover of the Venn diagram, human support and company support, that's where the chief of staff would go. There's a lot of other ways we can describe the role, but as I get a lot of questions of like, I'm thinking about operations, I'm also thinking about chief of staff, which one? Do you love supporting a leader? Do you love supporting their strategy, their initiatives, their ensuring their back office is running really smoothly, their executive team? It's really the inner workings of that leader's ecosystem, human support, high-level business support for their strategies as well. So I wanted to kind of double click into there for a second. All right, so as we continue on this conversation, I want to hear a little bit about the tactical differences in your job, Kristina, from EA work to chief of staff work. So if we can think back to when you were an EA, tell us maybe like 5 or 10 things, just list off that you were doing as an EA, and then we'll pause and we'll do the same thing for when you moved into chief of staff.
Ooh. I only have 10. I could give you 100 when okay.
As many as you can fit into a couple minutes.
EA would have been heavy calendar management, logistical coordination, flights, booking hotels for my executive and making sure they get from point A to point B without a hitch. There would be an aspect of inbox management, fielding what was coming in, going out. And then there was personal assistant work as well, tapping into supporting the executive on that personal front. And something that I learned from my executive, she never separated the two. Her life was one whole circle, and she wanted someone to support that whole circle. And so the personal assistant side of it would have been a good bit of responsibility as well. And then as far as chief of staff goes, around the time of my actual promotion, we became private equity backed. So there was the operational side of establishing like that rhythm of business, owning prep for board meetings, making sure that leadership had an understanding of like, what is it that we're reporting on, and building out like the goals and rolling them out to the company and keeping track of them and owning the conversation of like, okay, and why are we off track, or what are we going to communicate about this? So my role definitely shifted from, again, that laser focus on the exec, and then it kind of panned out in the chief of staff role where, what are my principals' initiatives? What are they looking to get done? How do I help drive that? And then a big shift within my role as chief of staff was certainly that relationship management within leadership. So really making sure there was cohesion around what every leader was doing and why, where was their overlap, what was the reason for this bottleneck, like where. So my shift became very broad as a chief of staff. Although there was still overlap during the EA part of the role, that heavy calendaring and logistics pretty much fell off. And I'm going to plug this here to say, a good way to determine, and I know you didn't ask me this, Maggie, but just in case anyone's thinking like, how do I know? If you love things like calendar management, inbox management, they are tactical, but they also require strategic thinking. So you are already doing strategic work with those things. If you love that and you would greatly miss it, then think twice about the chief of staff role, because when it's done in its true form, you shouldn't be doing those things. So that's a good way to gauge like the tactical part of my role as an EA. How am I going to feel if all of a sudden I woke up one day and I didn't have that? Do I feel tied to, is there purpose tied to that? Then think, give yourself an opportunity to think long and hard, because there is a lot of strategy right there anyway. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I love that. Becky, did anything come up for you as Kristina was chatting that you want to chime in on here?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that it also depends on what's being asked of you and what's being expected of you. I do want to mention that sometimes you do not get to hold the strategic part that you would like to hold with your executives. Sometimes they take that away. And I have had that happen more than not. And I am being reactive to whatever their needs are. And you're going to get that regardless of whatever job you go into. So I think that it's important to just go for what you feel aligns with you, but then also be adaptable and flex based upon needs.
Yeah. Yeah. This kind of makes me click a little bit deeper into some of the components of maybe calendar or inbox that a chief of staff would have insight into, just to help provide a little clarity from the chief of staff side too. absolutely, a chief of staff is not going to be the doer of calendaring or inbox management or any of that. However, a strong chief of staff will often have visibility into, let's say, the calendar. They don't need access. They don't need to move things around. They need visibility to ensure the leader's prepared for everything they're walking into, to ensure the executive team is aligned on the leader's priorities. A chief of staff may create processes and systems and templates or transparency documents to offer this like transparency and visibility into for their team, or to help kind of systemize some of this that maybe the EA will own and do, but the chief of staff is like, hey, we need a strategy here because X, Y, or Z is the problem, and here's the solution. So there is components of kind of the logistical side for a chief of staff work. Like there is a lot of that organization and, you know, systematic and all that. But to Kristina's point, like you are not the doer anymore. So if you are like really going to miss the moving around the calendar, I completely agree. But yeah, sometimes there's a lot of back office needs that are still kind of like organizationally focused. Okay. There's some questions. I'm kind of starting to look through questions in our chat because there's a lot of them. So as a reminder, Q&A box in the webinar here, there's some good questions around advocacy. A lot of questions around how do I advocate for the chief of staff role, or how do I advocate to move into the chief of staff role when my leader or the C-suite doesn't know about it, doesn't want it, doesn't think they need it, you know, a million other reasons. And then on the other side, which I'm going to pose to Becky, would be how do I advocate for taking on more responsibility as an EA? And how do I advocate for the increases in pay and like getting up to the salary that I think I deserve, as you know, you mentioned earlier. So let's start with the EA component. Becky, would love to hear, how do you advocate for yourself, taking on more and making what you deserve, asking for pay raises, et cetera?
I feel like there's always the opportunity to take on more. It's just asking the right questions. It's finding a need that needs to happen and then asking, bringing it up and addressing it. You know, how about I focus on this? You know, would it help if I take this off your plate? You know, really getting clear about the ways that you can help without having to be asked. I think that that's one of the things that kind of gets in the way of maybe us taking on more is that we feel we have to ask, or we have to be given it, but instead like create the opportunities for yourself, ask if you can take them on, you know, or start preparing the work and then showing the output of it. You know, I did this, take a look at it. What do you think of this? And how does this save you time? A way to advocate for yourself in pay is, number one, you should always be talking to the people around you about what they're making. You can talk to other EAs about this. There is not a law saying that you can't, and it is your right to know this. Talk about pay. Seriously, if you don't feel comfortable talking to people within the company, talk to people outside of the company. But I will tell you that I did find once that somebody was making significantly more than me. And
I love that.
And I went to bat for myself because I had the data to back that up. You know, I was going, this person technically is below me on the chart, and yet they're making a significant amount more money than me. There's something wrong with this. They also happen to be a man, just FYI. So get very clear about what people around you are making, what they're doing, how they're showing up, you know, and if you ever get into a situation where you're like, I don't know what to do, look at other people for examples. I mean, they can be leaders that can steer you in the right way.
Yeah, I love that. I love everything you just said. We're going to stay on this for another minute. Kristina, how would you add that EAs can advocate for themselves in their current role as EA with pay or more responsibility?
I think one of the greatest advantages that an EA has with their executive or the executives they support, you know how your executive thinks, you know how they like information presented to them, you know how they like to talk. So take your executive structure and build out something that when you now present, you need to be educated on what it is that you want and why. You can't go into conversations with your executive without the answers to all the questions they're going to ask you, right? So, hey, I think I want to become a chief of staff. Okay, great. Pretend like, what does a chief of staff do? Why do you think you should be a chief of staff? Scope out how you're currently doing chief of staff roles and what data backs up as proof as to, yes, this is how I'm doing this, right? So be organized, be very clear and succinct, and approach your executive the way you know they like to be approached. Whether it's requesting time, giving them a heads up as to, hey, I would love to carve out 30 minutes to talk to you about myself. Not tacking it on to like the one-on-one where you're constantly talking to them about what's coming up for them the next week. Carve out very intentional time about you and approach your executive in a way. And this is, I know there's a lot of nuance. It depends on the relationship you have with your executive, how comfortable you feel. I know all of that, but in a perfect world, you would put all of this information on your executive as a place to, hey, here's how you can now in turn partner with me. I'm partnering with you all day, every day. Here's how you can support me. These are my goals. These are my aspirations. So prepare the information, be very data driven, carve out time for yourself with your executive and approach them in the way you know they would appreciate it. Don't spring it up on them out of nowhere. Like whatever their style is, map to it and leverage what you know about your executive in advocating for yourself.
Yeah, I love that. We have a lot of folks in our course, in Nova's course, that are trying to figure it out. They're like, I don't know, how can I add more value? I don't know the things I should be doing or the things I could be doing. And of course, like, our course has tons of ideas, right? Like 20 plus hands-on assignments that you are doing the day-to-day functions of a chief of staff. A few of those you can probably take on as an EA, but we always say, try not to do both jobs at once because you'll work way too many hours like Becky. But obviously, like, it is really, like, I love what Becky and Kristina both said about figuring out what are the ways you can add value and taking that strategic recommendation to your leader and positioning it. And sometimes it's not about an ask. It's about, I'm going to let them know, hey, I thought about a new way to do this. I'm going to try it out for the next couple weeks. I'll check in a couple weeks and we can see how it's going. Or I'll get some feedback from you in a couple weeks. It's an assumptive close. You're taking initiative. You're showing that you're thinking about the bigger picture. This is EA or chief of staff kind of thing, right? And you're not making the leader make a decision. You're making that decision for them. And then you're giving them an opportunity. If somebody came to me with that and I was like, no, please don't do that, you'll hear that, right? But if it's an idea that could help improve the business, testing and learning is part of business. And I think having the approval and the acknowledgement and the okay to be like testing and learning in your role as a new chief of staff or as an EA is really, really helpful. So go test and learn, try out some things, figure out some resources, and we'll go from there. All right. So chief of staff advocating. We talked a little bit about EA advocacy in terms of taking on more responsibility and in terms of pay. Kristina, you made the move from EA to chief of staff. I know that you've found resources to help you in your chief of staff role. You've now moved on to another role. Let's spend a moment talking about how you advocate for yourself throughout that transition into the chief of staff role, resources maybe that you needed to utilize, and then why don't you share with everybody the update too on how you then decided to move into the next position for yourself.
So yeah, the advocacy piece, it was certainly well thought out, right? It was approached very strategically. I had done some research as much as I could at the time of digging around, like what does the chief of staff do? Where do I see similarities between, let's say I took a few chief of staff job descriptions, looked for what was the similarity across each, which meant in my mind, well, this was the foundation, right, as to what these chiefs of staff do. And then kind of mapping that to what I was doing in my current role. One part of my advocacy that in hindsight, I'm like, that was kind of good. It was also flagging what I wasn't doing and where was there a growth opportunity for me in the role, right? Like, what did I want to actually challenge myself to add to my tool belt within the first, I don't know, 90 days, 120 days within the role? So approaching it from a place of here's what I am doing, here's what I'm not, but also here's what the business could use some of that no one else is doing, right? Like whether it was that dotted line within leadership and driving that alignment, how I could actually do that. So it was strategically done. Time was carved out again to talk about these things. And then a roadmap was put in place. Okay, here's how I'm going to get to the chief of staff role from that conversation. date in the next 6 months. And here are the milestones that you want to kind of see me kind of like unlock and hit along the way to get there. So a roadmap is also helpful because then you kind of set a goal for yourself.
Yeah.
And you work
Yeah.
with the executive to, okay, check in, like, okay, let's just make it clear, check, or there's more room, you know, for work
Yep.
there. So come up with a plan, have a roadmap, and then be able to connect the dots for yourself and say, this is why I feel confident about it, because I'm already doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so one more question for you, Kristina, that I see in the chat here, and then I'm going to spend a second talking about resources as well. Quick answer on this one. Did you feel that moving from the EA to chief of staff role, essentially, were you in more conversations with senior leaders of your company? Did you end up having a greater influence and interaction within your C-suite when you moved from EA to chief of staff?
I'm going to say no. I had it while I was in EA.
It's good.
I had it while I was in EA. I had the rapport with my executive team while I was in
Which
EA.
probably made the transition easier.
Which made the transition actually easier because I had
Yeah.
the relationship with them already. And that was
Yeah.
built. And that had a lot to do with, as an EA, I was in the room with them, in the meetings with them, having the conversations with them. Some of them I had like my own little one-on-ones with.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we still have a lot of questions in the chat around how do I talk about the chief of staff role with my executive? I'm just going to point you to some resources. Check out novachiefofstaff.com. Check out our free resource library. Check out our blogs. There's a lot there around articulating the chief of staff role. Of course, the course is going to be your best bet. You're going to learn what you're good at, how to articulate it, how to add value, all the things. But there's a lot of free resources on our website that you can absolutely start with. You learning and articulating the value you can add as a chief of staff is number one. So you personally, as the listener on this webinar, figuring out how do you talk about the chief of staff role and also how do you think about how a chief of staff would add value to your company is the first step. And we've got a lot of resources for that on our website. And then a couple kind of tactical questions here in the chat. How do I know when a company needs a chief of staff versus an EA? And can you say that a chief of staff is similar to a project manager? Do you need both? I always tell leaders that very first, you need an EA. You should be taking that work off of your plate, calendar, inbox, expense, travel, logistics. Most likely before you're going to need high level, kind of that human strategic support of a chief of staff, but often you need both. And depending on so many factors, you may have both. It could be, you could be a company with 5 employees and you have a chief of staff as one of them. You could be a company with 5,000 and you've never heard of a chief of staff. So it really depends on if the leader, like the way I talk about it is if the leader is spending too much time heads down, focused on executional tasks, follow-ups, running their own projects, all of that, and they already have an EA, but they really need more time to get their eyes up, focused on vision, future strategy, and growth, then bring in a chief of staff to help you run your most important like strategic projects that don't have anywhere else to land in your company. In terms of project management, executive project management is a critical component to a chief of staff role, and a lot of incredible EAs are also going to be really strong project managers if they're leading bigger projects, but a lot of times this is more of a chief of staff function. Project manager and chief of staff is not the same. You can have a project manager across a lot of different teams. It could be for a certain project versus for a human. A chief of staff more so exists for that human, and that project management approach can be applied to whatever they might be working on, throwing an event, an all hands, an offsite, running an initiative cross-collaboratively with their company. So they are not interchangeable, but a lot of PM responsibilities within the chief of staff role, and we teach a ton of that within our course. All right, I'm going to move on to another question here. Let's say here, there was a question here for Becky that I wanted to pull back on. Okay, so in an environment, Becky, where there is not a chief of staff, how do you decide? Let's say that you work normal hours. How do you decide what you take on outside of your current role and where you add value that might fall into chief of staff scope, but for you, it doesn't really matter. You're just getting the job done.
Yeah, I mean, Literally, when I'm getting the job done, it doesn't matter. Whatever is asked of me, whatever I'm told to take on, I just do. That is part of my personality. But I would say that if you're struggling with that and you're trying to get very clear, I have this full job, where do I add this in? I would say talk to your executive, like make them aware of what they're already asking you, what additionally that they are asking you, and have them decide, where you prioritize things. I mean, they know what they need and they'll be happy to give you direction on that, I'm sure. If you are looking to do more chief of staff and that is not what your role is, then I think you need to really take a step back and figure out, is this the place for me?
Yeah. And another question here for you, Becky, and maybe Kristina can weigh in as well. How do you get the respect that you deserve as an EA? How do you get the respect you deserve, and how do you lead with the confidence that you maybe should have as an EA?
Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you do not get the respect that you deserve. I've had more jobs where I haven't had any of the respect that I deserve while I'm breaking my back. It's just a part of the game. It is a part of the process. And so it becomes really important to realize what you're willing to put up with. For me, that is largely based on money. If you're paying me this amount, I'm willing to do a lot more for you than if you're not. And that may look like, looking for other avenues to go to for another job, keeping my resume up to date, making sure that I'm able to pivot at any time. I would say the best way to earn respect, though, from executives is to show up, to, put your best foot forward, to always be thinking about them, always be one step ahead, to not make mistakes. Mistakes will be the biggest thing that they will hold against you because they lose trust. And once they start losing trust, then they don't trust you, and then they don't value the relationship, and that can be an end all. So just being really, really present about what you're doing, what you're producing, and making sure that you're in line with your executive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. All right. I'm going to try to get through as many more questions as I can in the next few minutes. So we'll be quick here with our answers. I'll answer this one. Do you believe supervision of people in your background is necessary for the chief of staff role? It definitely won't hurt. Being a people leader, you learn a lot. You learn a lot from an emotional intelligence perspective. You learn a lot about how to get people to do what you want without necessarily having to tell them, do this. But that's called influential leadership. And that is what is most important for a chief of staff. Influential leadership, the leadership of people who don't necessarily report to you, but who you need to have them get something done. And strong EAs also are incredible with influential leadership, but they need to be reminded that they're incredible influential leaders, because you EAs are influencing people all the time also. And so it's really helpful to think about things that way so that you can talk on your resume about what a great influential leader you are and the examples of how and why. Often that, like the awareness and the emotional intelligence that's shown through your acknowledgement of how you're an influential leader, is what can be really pivotal when you haven't had that people leadership experience in the past. Okay, Kristina, how does one navigate their core EA duties while they are potentially positioning themselves into the movement to chief of staff, like transitioning or positioning into chief of staff? Short answer.
I think it's a bit of a combo. One, figure out if there's an opportunity to backfill yourself, right? Like in the middle of transitioning, is there an opportunity to bring on an EA that maybe shadows you in the interim, right? Depending on how heavy those responsibilities are. While you're in it though, let's say you're fully in the EA role, taking on some chief of staff responsibilities, then you have to prioritize best for yourself and understand, where can I automate? How can I get faster at some of these tactical responsibilities to not have to drop them, so that I can spend more time in the chief of staff things? And what actually can I take off my plate? So it might be a good time to reassess what's on your plate first.
Love it. Yeah, I think that's great. We're still seeing a lot of questions about pitching from EA to chief of staff. We've got a whole section on our website in our resource library at novachiefofstaff.com around pitching yourself from EA to chief of staff. And it's like reflection exercises, actual pitch documents, business case proposals, all of those things. So check that out for sure. Okay, I love this question. There's a lot of talk around chiefs of staff and EAs having their place at the table and in the room. Should either or both of these roles have a voice at the table and in the room, or are they more observer roles? And is it the same or different for both roles? Becky, do you have thoughts on this one first?
Yeah, I think it would be different for both roles depending upon what each person's working on. But I will say that it's very important to be in the room and at the table because first of all, we need the context, but we also understand maybe better what everybody at that table is going through than our executive does. Our executive is their boss. So they don't really get insight into how their team is really feeling about things. So I think for the EAs to be a part of those conversations, to know the team intimately, it can bring a lot of knowledge to the executive and harness them with power, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. I absolutely think both people should be in the room and at the table. The chief of staff may be a louder voice dependent on what they're working on, but they should never be the loudest voice in the room, and they should definitely be listening more than they're talking as a chief of staff. Final thought from me here as all of this is happening is a lot of times I think it's helpful to remind folks that asking questions is a really, really good sign of interest and of intelligence and of confidence. And when you're at the table and in the room and you don't understand something, think about the person in the room that makes the most sense to ask the question of. Wait until you're out of the big staff meeting and go up to them and ask, say, hey, I want to learn a little bit more about this. Do you mind sharing with me in just a couple sentences what you were talking about? Or is there someone on your team I could follow up with? Sometimes we feel like that makes us look bad, or we should already know. I've been here for 2 years. No, absolutely not. I've been a people leader for 20 years. It is a sign of being achievement focused and growth and wanting to learn more and curiosity. It's always a good thing. And I think it'll show a lot to the people that are in the room with you, that you really care about what you're doing and care about learning, and that you are a strategic partner as you continue to learn more and more. All right, we could go on and on. A lot of times people are like, these should be longer. And a lot of times people are like, thank you for ending on time. So we're going to go with that one. Kristina and Becky, thank you so much for being here. I'll let you have a couple final words.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. This was absolutely wonderful. To everyone chiming in or listening in, you all are amazing. The fact that you're showing up means you're hungry, you want to know more, and that in and of itself is exemplary. So this has been wonderful. Thank you, Maggie.
Thanks, Kristina.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure. I love doing anything with Kristina. It's always a pleasure. And for everybody else that is listening, it is incredible that you are showing up for yourselves. I mean, whether you follow through on any of this, the fact that you were just in this room, that you took the time to be here, that matters most. I did see a lot of your questions. I'm going to put together an Ask Me Anything to answer all of them. So I appreciate all of you.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for being here. As a reminder, you have 30 days if you're looking to enroll in our course. We never really offer discount codes. Nova Chat 250, all caps. We'd love to meet you in the course. And thanks everybody for being here. We will meet again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.